Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to our first coffee morning and expert knowledge-based session for 2022. So we are absolutely delighted that we've got a really great group of attendees with us today, quite a large number, so that's fantastic. We appreciate your time today. And we also have two fantastic experts in the field of social procurement, which is our topic for today. So first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself and also the Social Enterprise Mark team. So my name is Sally Ryan. I'm the Business Development Manager at Social Enterprise Mark, whilst covering for Rachel, who is currently on maternity leave. We also have with us today Lucy Finley, who is our Managing Director. Don't know if Lucy, you'd like to have a little wave and make yourself known to everybody.
Hello everyone. Welcome.
We also have Sophie. Sophie is our marketing manager, but actually this is going to be her last coffee morning for a little while because she's off on maternity leave very shortly. And Sophie is operating all of the back office functions so that I can focus on the conversation. But Sophie will be able to answer any questions within the chat if there's anything immediate and urgent. But Sophie, would you like to say hello and just run through your sort of marketing role within Social Enterprise Mark?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. Good to see so many people here today. I think this is our most popular coffee morning so far, which is great. It's good to see some familiar faces as well as some new faces, so welcome. Yeah, as Sally said, I handle all the marketing and communications for Social Enterprise Mark, shortly handing over to Sally and a new member of our team who I think is listening in today, Dren, who's recently joined us. Great to see you all.
Yeah. Dren, are you around? Would you like to say hello to everybody?
Yeah, sure.
So Dren
everyone.
Hello. So Dren is our new admin assistant, sort of for the business. So literally second week in?
Yeah, second week, that's correct.
Fantastic. So Dren will be sending out marketing sort of emails and keeping an eye on our social media feeds, etc., for the next 6 months. So we're delighted to have Dren with us as a new member of the team. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So getting to our speakers, we are really privileged today actually to have two very knowledgeable speakers. So first of all, we have David Shields, and David is the co-founder of Value Match. They are an organisation, one of our mark holders, who work to bring commissioners of contracts, often private sector, together with social enterprises, i.e. the supplier side of things. But I think I'm correct in saying, David, you were previously the Managing Director of the UK's Government Procurement Service as well?
Yes, I was, now called Crown Commercial Services. So I guess I have a couple of different hats actually. So Value Match, we do all things procurement really, advisory. We support people bidding into contracts, resourcing and training. We do online training, a lot of focus around social values, sustainability. I also run procurement, sustainability and social impact for NHS SBS, about 2,500 suppliers. £2 billion worth of spend under management, non-exec at Social Value UK.
So you kind of know your stuff around social procurement, and especially for, I think today we were interested in, obviously through the conversation, your perspective almost from the sort of commissioning and the contract management side, which I think will be super helpful to get that kind of insight for those people attending today.
Yeah, that's great. And I look at it both from the supply side and the procurement side. So we support businesses bidding into public sector contracts quite often.
And Value Match is a social enterprise in its own right as well. So it's great to be able to sort of walk the talk, if you like. So thank you for joining us today. And I'd also like to introduce Julie Hawker. So Julie is a very long-standing member of Social Enterprise Mark, I think one of our very early adopters. And she is the CEO of Cosmic IT. So Julie, I know you've had quite an exciting couple of years, which seems a little bit strange to say, given obviously we've all had a lot of challenges through COVID, but sort of run us through sort of Cosmic and how things are going there.
Yep, so without making myself sound too old, because I'm feeling it today, but Cosmic, we've celebrated 25 years recently as a social enterprise, so by no means new to this game. And as you said, I was heavily involved alongside Lucy in the development of the Social Enterprise Mark, and I always like to claim that we were mark holder #1. I think there are a couple of others who say the same, but I always say that because it sounds good. But yeah, very, very committed to the work of the mark and its establishment, and still committed, and I'll explain in a while why that's important. So yes, Cosmic, a team which is now 54 staff, working across the Southwest region, primarily delivering digital skills and business support, but also we do some web work and we do some tech services work.
Fantastic. And I mean, we were having a little chat in our technical green room. We named it up this morning because David very kindly did put himself into a green room to join us for the session today. But although it has been a challenging year, there does feel like there is this real opportunity, not only for social enterprises, for those enterprises and business leaders who have taken the challenge as an opportunity to innovate. And I think, as you were saying, a lot of your business, that shift in growth has very much been around digital skills. So I guess addressing new market needs is kind of one of the things that you've done at Cosmic.
Well, yes, you know, just under 2 years ago, everybody realised how lacking they were in digital skills. So it's no surprise that we had some gaps to fill across the past 2 years. And of course, we also had to keep our eyes, whilst the demand for our services was rocketing, and I can't, you know, that first summer, there was never enough of us, and there were never enough hours in the day for lockdown #1 and going into that into the second lockdown. We could never have fulfilled the demand for our services in that period of time. So a big challenge for our team became, don't be too distracted from those people who really need our support, can't afford it, can't access it, whatever it might be. So the meaningful role of our mission, our vision and our values was really challenged during that period as well. So remaining close to the social impact agenda when the opportunities for us to be drawn in the opposite direction were incredibly strong.
And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because actually as social enterprises where we have those stated social and environmental objects, that goes back, it's a good reference point to go back and kind of hold us true, isn't it, in terms of being able to be really clear about who our community of benefit are, and actually how we're doing that reinvestment piece, and staying true to that, whilst looking at new opportunities and new innovation. And certainly the sense that I have is that out of COVID and the conversation that we have around this wonderful phrase of build back better, but actually it's opening up a real window of opportunity, not only for the sector, but also for this kind of added social value, social impact that we can gain through looking at procurement. So David, I'd be interested in your response from the commissioner perspective, and then perhaps Julie, yours from the sort of the supply chain side of it would be a great starting point for us as we talk about social procurement.
I think in terms of procurement, and both private and public sector, actually, there's a significant demand and interest now in working with social enterprises, smaller micro businesses as well, in region, to deliver added benefits. And I think we're seeing it on the public sector side in terms of policy and legislation changes, and there are going to be significant changes, I think, through the next year and a half. Obviously, since we've exited the EU from a public sector perspective, there's a whole shift in change in the regulatory environment, with a lot more focus on sustainability and social impact. And that does play to build back better, the levelling up agenda and so forth. I think it also is worth identifying that private sector very specifically are also seeking to demonstrate greater responsibility. ESG is the new CS. But it's all directionally extremely important, and we're seeing this built into formal plans and strategies around how to engage with social enterprises, have more diverse supply base, a localism, partly sustainability as well. So we are seeing some fairly big shifts, I think, in awareness and demand across all sectors, actually.
And I think that localism and place-based social value is actually quite key, particularly for the social enterprise sector, because one of the challenges has often been, particularly with the spend opportunity that we have through public sector contracts, probably about 60 billion a year, if we look at the SE UK reports, is smaller social enterprises and SMEs in the wider perspective. They kind of go, but how can we get into these public sector contracts? You know, we can't access them because we're small and we work within very tight localities, sometimes micro localities. So is that sort of something that in terms of, I guess, sort of future-scaping, you know, sort of what you feel is going to be happening through these procurement shifts from public sector contracting?
Absolutely, and I think we're going to see that accelerate. So there has been a focus, and again, different parts of the public sector very specifically have operated in different ways. So I think local authorities have been a lot more progressive around social value in general, more focused on local supply. Central government has had objectives and targets around the use of SMEs since 2010. I think what's been missing is the proportionality and accessibility of spend for social enterprises and micro businesses as well. So I think what we're seeing is an evolution of the way procurement processes are starting to evolve. So certainly within HSSBS, we're now talking about regional supply chains. How do we get closer to the supply base? And again, from a community impact and also from a positive impact in terms of environmental, food miles and the like, using local supplies much more effectively. The big thing we're trying to do is enable that a little bit, but be proportionate. So let's not have a 100-page ITT document if we're trying to do £10,000 worth of business with a social enterprise, because it's sort of not proportionate. The use of, I was going to say DPS, but dynamic purchasing systems, for those who
we're trying to do the acronym-free sort of version of the session today.
The whole point of that is to make things a little bit more fluid. People can onboard contracts on a continuous basis and have lower hurdles to encourage people to apply. So, and the last point, there's been some academic research. I was speaking to someone from one of the universities yesterday who was saying actually COVID response had 61% of new suppliers, and a lot of them were local small businesses who pivoted to provide PPE and so on and so forth. So there's quite a few shifts and changes, although I would say with my procurement hat on, we have a lot more to do in terms of proportionality and actually engaging with social enterprises and micro businesses.
Okay. Thank you. Julie, how about you, sort of from the supply chain side of things?
So we have, at this current time, we have a range of public sector contract arrangements, some of which we are partners in delivery with a prime leading the contract, a couple of others which we are lead part and accountable body. So we've got a mix of of models in the business at the current time. And I think I was listening closely to David's commentary about, you know, the way forward and how we make the playing field more effective. So I have a concern that social enterprises definitely need to professionalise their approach to procurement processes. So I wouldn't want to see those processes done down too heavily when it comes to social enterprise engagement in delivery, because I think there is a nice, you know, a bridge to be built between the absolute processes that need to be there to protect social enterprises, especially on, you know, clawback and legals and things like that. So there is an amount of education to go on, and I'm sure David has that in mind as well. But the other thing, and the thing that is bearing heavily on my mind at the moment, is we have an opportunity at the moment as we move through the, you know, the legacy delivery of ESF and DRDF contracts. We've still got some of those going on in our business. We're in the madness of CRF delivery too at the moment. I'm happy to give examples of all of these. Sorry about the acronym, Sally. We're in the madness of government commissioned CRF projects at the moment. And then we've got a weather eye on what's coming through on Shared Prosperity Fund, SPF. And for me, the far biggest debate to be held in this transition period is what the overhead looks like. And that's a very, very specific point, I know, but EU projects broke lots of social enterprises because of the financial constraint on the model for delivery. And that was always cited as a 15% overhead on staff costs. And there are actually very few organizations of a certain scale. Bigger organizations can make those numbers work sometimes, but there are very few organizations of a certain scale that can actually make a 15% overhead work. I know that's very specific, Sally, but at the moment, my laser vision on this and this opportunity as we transition out of one regime into another is very strongly focused in that direction.
And I think that is absolutely quite right. You know, payment by results has by no means been perfect. So it's often felt like a bit of a holy grail when we get that, you know, contract award notice. But then, yeah, delivery and contract management contract reporting are two whole sort of entities in their own right. And I guess it's asking the question is, social enterprises do need to be ready to step up, don't they, to fulfill these contract opportunities. And I do my analogy of it's no good social enterprise wanting to do pink knitted giraffes if the world needs blue wooden kittens, 50p a pop versus, you know, sort of £5. So having that commerciality and actually understanding market needs, and can we provide the goods and services from within the social enterprise sector? Can they be to time, price and quality? And then can we step up with that professionalism and be ready to deliver those contracts in a sustainable way to look after not only the commissioners, but also the social enterprises themselves, because we're often also working with perhaps vulnerable staff members within social enterprises, and we need to sort of protect that community of benefit. So I guess, David, is there much in terms of learning that we can take from the commissioning side in how social enterprises can really prepare themselves to start looking at these contract opportunities through a more social procurement approach that's being taken?
Well, that's quite a big question, isn't it? So from the sort of commissioner procurement side, and I think picking up on Julie's point, proportionality I don't think necessarily means lowering the standards, but I think
not at all.
making it easier and more precise in the way we engage, right? So, you know, and we quite often ask for information or certification or data which we don't actually use particularly effectively. So so from the procurement side, let's be super clear what we're asking and why we're asking for it, and we're going to do the information. I think in terms of understanding the procurement side a little bit about the requirements, there's there's if you look at it as an end-to-end cycle, you know we talk about pre-market engagement, right? So do you understand the market requirements and needs of your internal customers and the supply base, and are you able as a procurement expert to match those requirements together? And that sometimes requires adjustments and changes around the requirement developments and alignment with the market. So there's no use trying to specify something that the market either can't provide or just doesn't work in that way. And I think that's even more nuanced with social enterprises than other marketplaces actually. So what can social enterprises do in that side? They can engage effectively when they're aware of potential pre-market engagement and actually explain to the commissioners and the procurement individuals some of the nuances and changes in the way they operate and be open. Through the procurement process itself, obviously that tends to be, for right or wrong in the public sector anyway, arm's length, a little bit more arm's length, a little bit more mechanical. And what social enterprises need to do is you need to have the capability to bid effectively. And you need to understand the bid cycles and the processes, what you can ask for validation, verification on and challenge. But you need to be prepared to go through a process. And if you're not prepared, you really shouldn't embark on that because it takes a lot of time and it can be costly and you need some expertise and capability. So if you don't have that, there are organizations that can help you with the process and support until you build a sustainable capability. And then lastly, post-contract, then it's about building relationships up. And this is in a way, there would be no difference between public and private, but get close to the customer, understand the customer, but also share some of the challenges you may have as a social enterprise and try and influence the way engagement and communication happens post-contract. And again, don't underestimate the time, effort, and resource that's probably required, especially if you're dealing with, you know, a larger public sector body that's got multiple entry points and multiple requirements and end users. Again, that can be quite a significant overhead, I think, for organisations.
Thank you. And I think that's really, it is that influencing the specifiers of service, which is that it could be a head of service. It's not necessarily the procurement individual within a university finance team or a local authority. But I guess it's how we do that education piece. But I was particularly interested, and I wonder if Julie, you'd like to kind of come back on David's point about how do we engage and how do we go about engaging in that sort of pre-application and finding where those opportunities are and how we kind of begin as social enterprises to sort of say, hello, I'm over here, because often there are, as I say, sort of the great rigor and transparency and compliance as needed in contracts. But, you know, we could be talking about a £500 contract, which is small in terms of the local authority, but actually is quite significant to a small, it could be a translation service, you know, sort of within a social enterprise locality for a particular language. But what's your experience through Cosmic of that sort of pre-application, pre-sort of tender release?
So a couple of thoughts to share, more from a leadership perspective than from the detail, although I'm happy to share experience of more detail. But I guess some points to stress are, I call this swimming upstream. So, you know, how do you identify what's coming downstream 2 and 3 years from now? And make sure that your organisation is not just visible, but is evidencing what you're doing, the impact and the difference you're making. So here and now, regardless of what's coming downstream, are we shouting about what we're achieving regularly? Are we sharing our social impact reports with the influencers? Are we positioning ourselves on consultation processes or boards or steering groups for the issues that the public sector will be commissioning on in the years ahead? And that is, those things, by the way, can be, and let me be frank, utterly boring to be involved in from time to time, and also very time consuming. So you've got to be able to make a judgment, a leadership judgment about the strategic tactics involved in these things. But ultimately, if you want to understand and position your social enterprise as a prime candidate or a partner for what's coming next, then you have to be serious about investing well before any commissioning document appears, and sometimes they appear very quickly, i.e. CRF, but other times they are, several years in the making, and therefore rocking up at consultation events and responding to calls on consultation or sitting in on, public sector discussion forums. These are all things that we have found, in my experience, have positioned Cosmic in a certain way, alongside the effective delivery of anything we're currently commissioned to do.
Yeah,
so,
and that's it. We have to be contract ready in terms of actual delivery, don't we? We have to be able to meet market need.
Absolutely, and I don't just mean delivering what's in your contract, but I mean making sure that the relationships you hold with the public sector program managers, commissioners, all of the influencers further up the chain are invested in during that delivery, so that you evidence yourself as a delivery partner that can do the do, but also is trusted and regularly inputting to the thought process of how that program's going, what we're learning from it. Sharing case studies is a great way. So whenever I'm invited by one of our commissioners to speak about, what's going on in a program, I always bring with me, several case studies, especially to evidence the social impact thing.
And I think one of those areas. Sorry?
Sally, I was going to talk about the importance of the mark in that process. Would that be?
I was going to say, it's sort of like one of the things that we can do is really simply is actually make sure our marketing messaging is ready, and that social enterprises do need to tell their story, don't they? But back that up not only from the sort of anecdotal, but have that evidencing. And I know obviously through our accreditation process, we as mark holders, you've had that independent verification of your social impact statements, and actually it's not just that you're nice people doing some good stuff, but actually you do what you say you do, and it links back into your own values, your social objects, but also kind of aligns to sustainable development goals and ESGs, the environmental social governance side of it as well. So how have you found that process, and how do you link that into your application, your proposals, your tender submissions?
So going back to the sort of strategic approach on this, that I want to stress that this is about investing time well before commissioning kicks off more formally. Those discussions and those relationships that we're building need to include why commissioners and the team that are getting ready for commissioning have to consider social enterprises as a different type of entity, and as an I'll use Cosmic as the direct example, of course, but as an organisation that isn't going to just say a lot of things in the contract tender, which we will, but is actually evidencing our impact and committing to holding that standard. And if I roll back 15 years, let's say, I would regularly have been in conversation, because we've been doing delivery through public sector funding for all of that time, but back in the day I would have been in discussions with the public sector and with the private sector, because we do work on both sides, and the type of challenge I was getting was basically, and forgive my language, Julie, forget the hippie shit, show us the price and the value. And that was, so whilst I was continually trying to push on, Cosmic is different, Cosmic will take your money and we will deliver what you want from the project, but we will also create this extra And you know, the language of social value, social impact, it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't the narrative of the day. So, you know, that was part of me coming into the mix alongside Lucy, you know, and the work she was doing in the region at the time, but also, you know, others in Bristol were looking at, you know, a project up there called C3 was looking at this challenge as well. So there was a real energy around this frustration, this ultimate frustration of not being able to have those evidence-based conversations. So skip forward to when, you know, we successfully applied for the mark and became major advocates of the mark. Since that time, not only does the mark, as in the brand, sit across all of our marketing collateral, business cards, website, newsletter, whatever it might be, you know, footers on our emails, whatever it might be, it's a very, very regular piece of our branding piece. But also I will specifically reference the mark as the means by which Cosmic holds itself to account to evidence the impact, so that commissioners will have more confidence that we submit ourselves to a regime that demonstrates that evidence base. And you know, for those 10 years, the mark has been fundamental to those discussions, in my experience.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. And actually, I think it's that practicality of how you use it, how you position the fact that you are a social enterprise, and yes, the accreditation, the independent sort of sector-led accreditation. But it's very front and center, isn't it? And if you, I guess, David, if you're a commissioner, you know, you look at people's, you know, social media channels, you look at their website, you look not just the black and white of what's in front of you within a tender, but it's actually sort of making sure that we step up and we bring all of that messaging together so that it has credibility and confidence for the commissioners. Commissioners are usually low risk, whether they're private sector or public sector.
Yeah, so whether it's private or public sector, if you put yourself in the sort of seat of the commissioner, whether service delivery actually or procurement, well, let's focus on procurement and then service delivery. If you're in a mid-sized organisation, you're buying, you know, a whole plethora of different services from different sectors, from BT, Microsoft, to one-man bands, micro businesses, and you know, you're buying security services, equipment, capital, all sorts of things, right? So their ability to be experts, and I think someone put in the chat about capacity building, their expertise is going to be spread quite thin. So you might have a service side to this. The person receiving the services, who's probably got more expertise but doesn't understand the commerciality, the legals or processes. The procurement person doesn't necessarily understand the market or the sector, depending on how big it is and how complicated it is. And if we think about social enterprises, their direct experience of dealing with charities or social enterprises might be quite minimal as well. So Julie's point around the narrative is really important. You know, what's your narrative? What's the USP? What's your evidence base for impact? And this is one of the biggest challenges at the moment from the buy side's perspective, is really understanding what social value is and what social impact is. How do you baseline it and how do you measure it? Because again, I really like Julie's points about, you know, you've got to deliver. Well, from my background, that's carbon, water, waste reduction, local employment, community cohesion. In previous roles, it was 290 billion in the UK. Are we getting an effective impact for that? Now, I have to be able to demonstrate it. I can't just go, trust me, it's all good, chaps. That just doesn't work. So if as part of that narrative and case studies and social impact reports, you can evidence that impact and you can actually influence the buyer to put performance metrics in place that make sense for what you're providing in the services, that's going to help massively around how they approach you as an organization and the sort of trust and impact. And of course, you also need that because you're a service delivery provider and you need to see impact got moving forward. And I think So having that evidence base, embedding that in communication, in the way you manage contracts and manage stakeholders is critical. And then the assurance over social enterprise mark or equivalence. Again, if you look from the buy side, they're not experts, so an element of assurance is useful. That's why everyone has ISO 9000 standards or equivalent, ISO 14001 or equivalent, because there's a certain element of, you know, again, where I am today, I've got 2,500 suppliers on frameworks and £2 billion to spend. I cannot assure every supplier directly, so I almost need accreditation and certification to help me with that assurance processes. So it is really worth understanding, sitting in the buyer's seat and saying, well, how do they manage all of these things, and what assurances and evidence do they need, and ask the direct question. And hopefully then that helps you inform and position the organisations more effectively.
Thank you. And obviously we are at that point where we've had the sort of the 10 years on from the Public Services Social Value Act, and sort of reports from SE UK sort of looking at, you know, how has that actually moved the commissioning market on, particularly from the public sector side. So yes, you know, we've got this talked about £60 billion opportunity, and I think sort of waiting at the moment on social value within public sector contracts, certainly 10%, and we know that NHS are actually making that a mandatory 10% from April this year, I believe. And we've got some public sector organisations taking it up to 20% and above, I think.
So I'd like to make just one point before, and I'll pick up that specific area. We're talking public and private sector, by the way, in essence, and I've worked both extensively. When you peel back regulations and just talk about end-to-end processes, there's not that much difference. I mean, the way you engage may be different, and the speed of decision-making can sometimes be different. But in essence, they want great service, great value from trusted suppliers who they can have positive engagement with, and so on and so forth. So take this as a general statement. But we talk about the public sector. It is a very diverse. So as an individual organisation, if you're looking to work with the public sector, I think you have to be very targeted over which parts of the public sector you actually want to work with and why, and how does that match the services. So I use an example of, you've got Ministry of Defence, which is like 28 billion, huge spend, to a local borough council or a primary school. They're completely different. The requirements are different, the way they operate is different, the funding flows are different, the processes are different. So you need to be really precise around where you want to focus your time, effort, and resources, and then be very precise around what are the obligations of those organisations, and how does your social enterprise fit with those obligations, and how can you add that impact and value. And I think that will avoid a lot of unnecessary expense and sort of almost thrashing around the sector to find that targeted customer. And that's the case whether you're a huge multinational, frankly, or you're a micro businesses. You've got to be very specific around where you think the opportunity is, and just focus on that, because it's so big, everyone can get lost. And I think that's a really important point for people to focus on.
Thank you. And I just also want to bring, because obviously we've probably, in most of the contexting of this conversation, we've been talking about sort of the business to business side of procurement, and how we can add that social procurement element in, and bring extra value through, and suck it through cumulative supply chains as well. So knowing who your social enterprises are, and who within your supply chain is delivering social value. That you know, if you're a first tier contractor, for example, built environment, applying into a public sector contract, you can suck that whole supply chain social value through. But there is obviously the B2C side, hugely important. And I think there was in the it was either the Guardian or the Telegraph, they've recently said that ethical businesses for the first time, the spend has breached over 100 billion. So I think on that B2C side, there is still great opportunity, and we should never sort of overlook the power of that spend in B2C markets over and above the contracts sort of on the B2B side that we've perhaps sort of focused on a little more today. I sort of initially want to thank David and Julie for, I could have actually listened for a whole other hour, but I am mindful to at least open up the floor to open questions. I'm sure there may be a few burning questions. I don't know, Sophie, if anything's come through particularly on the chat, or if anybody wants to pop their hand up or pitch in at this point, if they want to tap into any of the expertise, either from Social Enterprise Mark, from Julie and from David.
There's no, I've been keeping an eye on the chat. There's no specific questions. There's some quite interesting observations. For example, Anne-Marie, who I think is also based down here in Devon, works for a support organisation like ourselves, and says it's quite difficult to access any sort of funded opportunities or contracts to deliver because they're not frontline. And I know that's something we come across ourselves, so don't know whether that's a point that we'd like to pick up on.
David or Julie, any particular thoughts?
Hi Anne-Marie, obviously same locality, and we have worked in partnership with your organisation several times over the course of our history, and I think there's part of the answer is, you know, collaborations in our, you know, approach to public sector contracts is vitally important, and again investing in making those work well. So yeah, we work with a range, and we're currently working on our CRF projects with another range of the infrastructure bodies, if you like, you know, sort of terminology we use, and are very happy in most cases to form those partnership and support the very valuable work of infrastructure type of organisations. So, you know, I think Anne-Marie, it's a case of, you know, making sure that if you're looking at public sector contracts, have a look at, you know, who's most likely to be positioning in as a frontline deliverer, and then, you know, make sure that you're in discussions with about the value you bring as that infrastructure role.
So look at consortia delivery, and if you're not in a consortia, look at who may be or how you could contribute to a consortia
and
network.
We do both, Sally. We've got some legal consortia agreements in place for some of our contracts, and others, you know, we are happy to do on a service level agreement basis. So, you know, what horses for courses, what works well.
And I guess from the commissioning side, it's if it is a consortia that's applying, obviously you've got to have a lead organisation that will take that on. But it's about being able to show that they are trusted and tried and tested relationships within the consortia, rather than something sort of flung together for the sake of the funding opportunity.
For example, in the business support world, we have a very long-standing and legally agreed consortia arrangement with another business support provider based in the area who does more generic business support. We do the digital business support, and we deliberately formalized that arrangement in order to bid on tendering frameworks. So not just to respond to commissioning calls, but actually to position ourselves in a long-term way that evidenced that we were, you know, not just working in partnership for the sake of this, but we had a long-standing, you know, trusted relationship that sat within that legal agreement. So, you know, we have all variety of agreements, but the role of some of these infrastructure organisations is vitally important, and Cosmic can't fulfil it. So, you know, it's an obvious one where we partner with an organisation for them to do that specialist work, and we focus on frontline delivery. Otherwise, we've got to go to the extent of trying to bring someone into our team just to replicate what someone else has already, you know, got the track record and the processes and systems. It makes no sense. So, you know, there is a win-win in this.
And there is always, you know, that niche operation and delivery is always really key, isn't it? In circumstances that you've just described within a contract, you often have a small, as I say, using the example of translation services, you know, whether that be for you know, visual impairment, audio, whether it be second language, third language kind of thing. That's not something that's viable for a business necessarily to have just within a contract, but actually working in collaboration with a local provider that brings their own social value through.
And Sally, you just, the smile on my face is just a thought that's dropped into my head. I ought to do this as an exercise. The SEM team might find this useful, but I can cite multiple, I couldn't put a number on it, but I'm thinking of probably 4 or 5 organizations that since we said Cosmic will work wherever possible, we will work with other social enterprises in these models. There are several organizations who have started talking about and evidencing themselves as social enterprises. So they've moved away from language previously that might have cited them as, you know, a public sector body or a partnership body, and they've definitely made that transition to develop their narrative around social enterprise and formalize their structures in that way.
Brilliant. Do we have any other questions? Because if not, I'd like to say hello to Isha.
Sorry, Sally, there is a quick question here from Jan from Waterman's. Question for David, this one. When people are looking to start communicating and articulating social value in their tenders, do you have any tips on what commissioners are looking for, or any insights on how people can best do that?
Yeah, so definitely case studies you reference, you know, case studies create an evidence base over impact. One of the really big challenges is the evaluation of impact. Now we've got a number of different mechanisms, and we have very, very different approaches across the public sector as well. So Scotland, for example, has made a policy decision not to evaluate on a financial basis social impact. Whereas in the UK, we have a lot of people using Social Value Portal and trying to put a number on social enterprises, social impact in the community. I think we're looking very much at an evidence base that is able to clearly articulate the actual benefit, the clarity over if there is a financial impact, what does that financial impact look, and what's the service execution. In terms of all bid responses, you need to present a case study or narrative in the language and in the order that's being asked in the tender documents, right? So the big things that people don't do, organizations don't do, is they don't respond to the questions in the tenders effectively, and then they just lose out because it's a mechanical process to a large extent. So even if you've got a case study, then you've got to take the time and effort to break that down into the way the specification or the question is being asked, right? So if you're in that process, don't assume that the buy side will read a different document. If you're asked to answer it in a specific way, you must answer it in that way. Otherwise, the likelihood is you won't be successful. So
really sort of simple examples, like if the commissioner is talking about service users, you might prefer to refer to customers or clients, but actually use service users because it creates that resonance and
100%. Again, if I'm the buyer, I might have 30 tenders to review. If you're me to interpret your language and the way you've answered or look at it in a different question, I'm probably not going to do that. So I'm obliged to only mark what's in front of me and so on and so forth. So being super practical, you know, use your examples, but tailor them to the actual tender. What I would say, I would always encourage people to try and influence, though, before any of the formal procurement starts, how things are specified and how things are going to be measured and scored and evaluated before the procurement starts, because the more informed and the more influence you can have onto the buy side, the more likely it is to match your capabilities and services being consumed by the citizen or the organisation. So again, I can't emphasise enough about how much influencing before the procurement starts is really important to get the right outcomes.
And I guess if we have any large-scale organisations with us today, so for example, a university, is perhaps open up the floor and do that pre-application, meet the buyer, that then can help shape the service that can then get a better result in the contract commissioning.
And just this one last point as well, if you're in the procurement process and it's actually not being done very well, you've got two choices. You can sort of fold your arms and say this isn't fair, or you can actually go back to the organisation and say this doesn't work for these reasons, and try and educate and help the buy side. Because, as I said, you know, I look at my team of people I'm running at the moment. They can't be experts everywhere. So if we get feedback, we'll try and improve and do something about it. So, you know, and don't underestimate the value of, you know, your expertise in helping and influencing future procurements.
Thank you, David. And very quickly, I can see that literally within sort of a minute, 2 minutes, so question and answer, I've got Natalie's got a very polite hand up. So hello to Natalie.
Hello there. Just to build on what David was saying, in terms of, I'm from Westminster Council and I'm responsible procurement manager, so really trying to push to include as many social enterprises, VCSEs in our supply chain as possible. Just building on what he said about evidencing case studies. So I've got every phone in the house is going off. Not useful. Yeah, so case studies are useful, but what we want to know as buyers is what you're going to do for us. So I am interested in what you've done in the past. I need some authenticity in terms of your response to sort of prove that you're able to do what you say you are. But we need you to then flip that round, those case studies, and say, you know, we've done all this, we've achieved these things in these areas, but what we're going to do for you is this, and make it really clear and specific. So woolly language, we need to cut through that. We don't want to read fluff. We've got too much fluff to read, just as Julie said earlier. We need clear ideas of what exactly it is you're going to do, when, how you're going to report it, how you're going to evidence it, because that's what we can score. We can't score fluff. So that's... And
how you're going to reduce demand in the next cycle of commissioning, potentially.
Yeah,
so
if that's the sector you're talking about, then yeah. But it could be anything. It could be digital marketing, it could be printing, you know, it's not necessarily just commission services we're looking for. So just, yeah, be clear with us on, yes, those case studies, but then flip that round to, and we are going to use all this experience we've had to deliver this for you. That's what we can mark you on.
Thank you, Natalie. Absolutely valuable. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I'm going to very quickly, if Aisha is from Supply Chain is still with us.
Hi, Sally.
Hello, how are you today?
Really well, thank you. Loved the discussion.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much for organising.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, fascinating. And I know obviously supply chain, you sort of work with social enterprises into supply chain and that sort of marketplace opportunity development. The reason that I wanted to sort of introduce you and ask you to say a very quick hello, apologies, it's quick. I'm kind of like pushing that point as we come to the last few minutes. But you've got a social procurement festival happening in March, haven't you? And I just wondered if you wanted to literally a couple of sentences to or share the link perhaps in the chat so that people can have a look at that as an event that may be of interest.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sally. Yeah, so we're just about to set up the event page this week, but there's our second social procurement festival, so it would be a great place to continue this conversation, and it's going to be a real mix of networking and learning. The theme for this year is collaborating for inclusive and impactful supply chains.
So perfect. That's Julie's. You hit the button early there, Julie. I think
right ahead of the trends. Yeah, so welcome everyone to come and join us on the day. We'll have lots of speakers from government, from social enterprises, from buyers as well. So brilliant to be here and get the ball rolling on this conversation, which is really important for this year. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. That's fantastic. Thank you, Aisha. So I'm going to kind of like just bring this to a bit of a close. First of all, I think if we have any other outstanding questions or reflections after today, when you're sort of recovering over a cup of coffee over in the next few minutes, please do drop either Sophie or myself a message on email at Social Enterprise Mark, and we'll happily do everything we can to respond to those, whether it's your interest in supply chain, whether it's your interest in becoming accredited. If you have a question that maybe has come out through the conversation today, we'll respond to those as quickly as we can. So please do that. And I guess for me, as I would like to wrap up, I've got a couple. I've kind of made a note of 3 key actions. So if you are a larger scale organisation or a smaller scale organisation, is look at your own procurement policy. Are you actually doing everything that you can do to encourage that social procurement element and really sort of begin to maximise that opportunity to bring social value through your own supply chain? So have you got the right policy? Are you asking the right questions? The other thing would be is know your supply chain. So do you actually know who the social enterprises are within your supply chain? Often, particularly with larger scale organisations, it might be you ask for a legal structure and it says, are you self-employed or are you a limited company? Well, we need to kind of actually understand who are the social enterprises because of the range of legal structures that we have. And then we can look at sucking through that cumulative social value. And also, I think for the social enterprises in the room, the clear message, I think, from David and Julie, and I think will probably perhaps also be discussed through the Social Procurement Festival with Supply Change in March, is if you are a social enterprise, get yourself ready now. It's not going to wait because other people will be doing that. So there is a real imperative to really take advantage and maximise this window of opportunity as we look at more and more ethical decision making from the B2B and the B2C side around how we can actually create real value through the social enterprise sector and make some real change in our local communities and for individuals. And improve those life opportunities, which fundamentally begins to take social impact through into building social mobility and social capital in our communities, and that makes really resilient, thriving communities. So we all have a little part to play day by day. And I wish you all a good day going forward. And thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And particular thanks to David and Julie for all that contribution and that expert insight. Absolutely invaluable. We look forward to our next coffee morning knowledge-based session, which is going to be on the 24th of March, and we'll be looking at scale and growth. Particularly with those kind of bridging points that accreditation can support, but also from an investment perspective. So we'll be joined by Good Finance for that coffee morning. So watch this space, keep an eye on our events panel, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.